This section covers the zoning permits procedure in section 12.4.1 of the Denver Zoning Code. The edits to the zoning permits section are intended to simplify the section through reorganization and to align zoning with some building code exceptions to the extent possible, and, as we've said, stop sweating the small stuff. This section has a new general rule added, which states that all construction of a new structure, changes to existing structures, changes in gross floor area, and any development that includes a request for zoning relief requires a permit. Section B2 begins describing the many exceptions to that requirement to get a zoning permit for a structure. Our first exception is a new rule for conflicting provisions when a structure meeting the definition of a minor detached structure building form is otherwise required to get a permit. So, for example, in-ground swimming pools will need a permit despite potentially falling into the parameters of the minor detached structure building form. Letter B here is another exception from zoning permit requirements when changes to the interior or exterior of the structure, when neither of the following apply. So when it's not located in an urban design standards and guidelines area, or when the changes do not affect gross floor area, location, footprint, height in feet or stories, compliance with build-to, transparency, or pedestrian access requirements. These standards were addressed previously in a more general manner, but now they are called out specifically. Our next exception is C, regular maintenance and normal repairs that do not change the location, increase the footprint, or change the building form of the original permitted structure. D is for structures that comply with the minor detached structure building form in Articles 3 through 9. The minor detached structure building form is a big step in the direction of simplification and, again, not sweating the small stuff. Any structure that fits within the parameters of that building form does not require a zoning permit. You'll also notice that the work of art exception from a zoning permit is no longer in this section, and that's because we think those will typically fit within the minor detached structure building form. E is generally for children's play structures such as tree houses, swings, play sets, slides. These are typically exempt from building permits, so we've added a provision here to exempt them from zoning permits as well. In letter F is for flagpoles, movable or permanent basketball goals, and other similar structures as determined by the zoning administrator. G is for building-mounted solar panels. H is for electric vehicle supply equipment as that's defined in the Denver Building Code. And I is for wall-mounted fixtures, wiring conduits, and vents integral to conventional mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection systems. It also gives several other types of fixtures that are included and gives the zoning administrator to approve other similar minor utility features. It's important to note that the exceptions listed in the previous section do apply to structures for preservation and districts for preservation, despite the heading that we gave section 3. The landmark preservation team looked at the proposed exceptions and found that the majority of the development or construction that they need to review for landmark purposes would be referred to them through a zoning permit or a building permit, even after the addition of the new exceptions. there were just two categories of things that they still wanted to review, shown here in items A and B. So these are the exceptions to the exceptions. First is any change to existing structures and new construction affecting a porch visible from a primary street or side street. Second, all construction of minor detached structures where the structure is forward of the street-facing facade of a structure for preservation, where the detached structure is in the front 50% of the zone lot depth, or where the minor detached structure is located 5 feet or less from the structure for preservation. So, for example, if you had a proposal for a minor detached structure on a zone lot with a structure for preservation, it would need a zoning permit if that minor structure, let's say it's a shed, was proposed in the front 50% of the zone lot depth or within 5 feet of the structure for preservation, for example. However, if the minor structure did not meet any of the location criteria in B1 through 3 on this slide, it would not require a zoning permit. It could still take advantage of the exception, even if it was on the same zone lot as a structure for preservation. This general rule for off-street parking areas says that any new off-street parking area, which is a defined term in Article 13, requires a zoning permit prior to establishment. There are 3 exceptions from that general rule. First is that no zoning permit is required when the off-street parking area is located on a zone lot containing a single or 2-unit dwelling use. Second, in B here, the development of the off-street parking area is not located within a primary street setback. So if it's located anywhere else, it can be permitted or it's allowed without a zoning permit. Or third, the off-street parking area does not alter an existing curb cut on a public street, and that includes creation of a new curb cut. A zoning permit is required to construction of any new fence, wall, or retaining wall. Under E2, we see the exceptions to the general rule. And first, we have an exception for retaining walls that are 12 inches or less in height. Changes to the height or location of an existing retaining wall. There's an exception to that exception, though. Those retaining walls that are located on a zone lot that contains a structure for preservation or is in a district for preservation still have to obtain a zoning permit for those low retaining walls that are 12 inches in height or less. This is to ensure that Landmark can see those proposed walls to review for any potential impacts to the historic structure or district. And this slide is a continuation of the exceptions from the general rule that all fences, walls, and retaining walls obtain a zoning permit prior to construction. The item labeled C on this slide makes an exception for fences and walls that are 4 feet in height or less, but it does not include retaining walls. Here again, we have an exception to that exception, meaning that fences or walls on zone lots that contain a structure for preservation or that are located in a district for preservation, or that are on a zone lot that abuts a parkway, if they meet CI number 1, 2, or 3, they will still need to get a zoning permit. And our last exception to the zoning permit requirement for fences, walls, and retaining walls is for regular maintenance and normal repairs to a permitted fence or wall, or replacement of a permitted fence or wall with like materials when it does not change the location, footprint, or height of the original permitted fence or wall. Finally, we've added an exception from the zoning permit requirement for addition of barbed or razor wire to the top of an existing permitted fence or wall. or the addition of non-lethal electrified fence systems to a permitted fence or wall if they're approved by the fire department. This is limited to the IA, IB, and National Western Center campus zone districts only, and these security fencing types have been added and addressed in Article 10 with a referral to the fire department for review.